Welcome to night 25 to fall asleep fast. This is a quiet place where you don't need to focus, remember, or do anything at all. You can simply listen or let the sound fade gently into the background. If it feels right, you can softly like this video now or leave a calm comment sharing where you're listening from and what time it is. There's no need to rush. Everything here moves slowly. Tonight, we explore the oddest pets of royalty, from lions to lemurs. A calm and unhurried story from the past, told gently, without urgency and without expectation. You don't need to stay awake for it. You don't need to follow every detail. If you were here last night, welcome back. And if this is your first night, you can begin right here, exactly as you are. A new night will be waiting for you again tomorrow. But for now, allow your breathing to slow, your thoughts to drift, and let this story quietly carry you toward rest. In the fading light of late afternoon, long before the courtyards emptied into shadow, the great palaces of Europe and beyond carried a stillness that seemed older than the stones themselves. High walls rose in measured symmetry, enclosing gardens shaped by careful hands. Gravel paths curved between hedges trimmed into deliberate forms. Marble statues stood in patient silence, their pale surfaces catching the last warmth of the sun. Within these ordered spaces, nature was not absent but gently rearranged. Royal courts had always gathered the rare and the remarkable. Silks from distant ports, porcelain painted in unfamiliar colors, spices carried over sea and desert. Over time, living creatures joined these collections. Not as spectacles in the modern sense, nor yet as institutions of study but as presences. They arrived quietly, often as diplomatic gifts or tokens of alliance, carried across borders in slow-moving caravans or ships that creaked against harbor wood. At first, the architecture did not change for them. Courtyards remained courtyards. Gardens remained gardens. Yet somewhere between the fountains and the clipped hedges, something shifted. The soundscape altered almost imperceptibly. Alongside the murmur of attendants and the soft echo of footsteps on stone, there came other rhythms. The low rustle of straw, the heavier exhale of unfamiliar lungs, the faint scrape of claw or hoof against a surface never meant to feel it. In these early moments, the presence of wild creatures did not disrupt the order of the court. Instead, they were absorbed into it. A pavilion at the edge of a garden might be set aside. A shaded enclosure constructed beside an existing wall. The additions were careful, respectful of symmetry. Even the extraordinary was expected to behave within certain boundaries. The gardens themselves offered a quiet stage for this meeting of worlds. Water moved gently through carved channels, feeding fountains that spilled into shallow basins. Fruit trees bent under the weight of late summer harvests. The scent of rosemary and lavender drifted in the evening air. Within this cultivated landscape, an animal from distant terrain might stand still, adjusting to the temperate breeze. Its coat or hide catching a different quality of light than it had ever known. Courtiers would pass at a measured pace, their garments brushing against gravel. They did not rush. They did not crowd. The creature's presence was acknowledged in the same restrained manner as a new tapestry hung in a corridor. A glance. A moment's pause. Then movement resumed. The rituals of court life continued. Audiences held, letters sealed with wax, meals served beneath painted ceilings. There was a quiet negotiation taking place, though it rarely drew attention to itself. The animal, accustomed to vast plains or dense forests, now found itself within walls. The court, accustomed to order and predictability, now contained a breathing reminder of landscapes beyond its reach. Yet neither side expressed urgency. Adaptation unfolded in small adjustments. Feeding times aligned with existing routines. Spaces were reinforced or shaded. Water was carried in buckets along familiar routes. As dusk settled, the atmosphere softened further. Torches were lit along stone arcades. Windows glowed with candlelight from within. Shadows lengthened across the gardens, merging the shapes of statues and living forms into a single silhouette. In this hour, distinction seemed less pronounced. Marble and muscle shared the same blue-toned quiet. The wildness present in these spaces was not loud. It did not roar through corridors or tear at the fabric of courtly life. Instead, it breathed. It blinked. It shifted its weight from one foot to another. Its existence was steady and undeniable, yet rarely dramatic. The court adjusted its gaze, allowing the unusual to become part of its daily horizon. Season by season, familiarity deepened. The first winter might bring careful concern. thicker bedding laid down, shelters reinforced against frost. By the second year the routines felt established. The gardeners knew which plants must be kept out of reach. The attendants understood the distance required for calm. What had once been remarkable gradually became woven into the background of courtly existence. There were moments, perhaps, when a visitor from another realm would pause longer than the rest. Standing at the edge of a courtyard, observing the quiet coexistence of sculpted stone and living wilderness, they might sense something difficult to name. Not tension exactly. Not novelty. Rather a gentle widening of possibility. A suggestion that the boundaries between cultivated and untamed were more permeable than they appeared. The architecture itself seemed to listen. Arched walkways framed views of enclosures as if they were paintings. Balconies offered vantage points from which the movement of animals could be observed without intrusion. The geometry of the palace remained intact, but its meaning expanded. Within its symmetry now rested something unscripted. Even the air felt altered. In the early morning before the court fully stirred, a faint earthy scent lingered among the roses. Dew settled on stone and fur alike. The first light of dawn revealed shapes at rest, a curved back rising and falling in sleep, a silhouette against the paling sky. The palace in these hours felt less like a monument and more like a shared shelter. Time moved without announcement. Weeks became months. The presence of wild creatures no longer required explanation. They were part of the landscape, as natural to the courtyard as the fountain's steady flow. Children born into the court grew up with their outlines in memory, never knowing a time before their arrival. Yet within this calm integration lay the quiet potential for something more specific. The broad category of the exotic would, in time, narrow into individual stories. Among the hedges and beneath the painted ceilings, certain animals would come to embody the court's imagination more vividly than others. Their forms would settle more prominently into frescoes and tapestries. Their movements would carry symbolic weight, even in stillness. For now, however, the scene remained wide and unhurried. A palace at dusk. A garden breathing softly within its walls. The meeting of cultivated order and distant wilderness held in balance, neither overpowering the other. The wild had stepped inside and the court had made room. And as evening deepened and torchlight steadied along the corridors, attention would begin, almost imperceptibly, to rest on one presence in particular. A heavier shape in the courtyard, a mane catching the glow of flame against painted ceilings. The heavier shape in the courtyard did not move quickly. It rested where the warmth of the stone had lingered after the day's sun had withdrawn, its broad body stretched along the patterned tiles beneath an arcade of painted arches. Above, ceilings carried scenes of distant myths and softened clouds, figures suspended in color and lime wash. Below, a lion breathed in an unhurried rhythm, its flank rising and falling beneath a mane that caught the amber light of torches. In several courts of Renaissance Italy and beyond, lions had long been familiar emblems. They appeared on crests and banners, carved into gateways and woven into tapestries. Yet there were moments when the emblem acquired weight and breath. When the symbol crossed a threshold and lay down upon real stone. The courtyards that held them were not vast arenas, nor wild enclosures. They were measured spaces, framed by columns and frescoed walls. The lion's presence altered their proportions without disturbing them. The echo of its movement against tile carried differently than the soft shuffle of slippers. When it shifted its paw, claws clicking lightly against the floor, the sound traveled upward into vaulted ceilings and returned softened, as though the architecture itself absorbed the difference. Care was taken in quiet ways. A shaded corner was selected where heat gathered gently through the day. Straw was layered thickly enough to cushion bone against stone. Water basins were kept filled and refreshed, their surfaces reflecting both sky and main in wavering light. Attendants learned to approach with steady pace and lowered gaze, not from fear, but from a mutual understanding of space. The lion did not roar often within these walls. Its voice, when used, was low and resonant, more a deep vibration than a proclamation. Most days passed without such sound. Instead there was stillness, a watchful gaze drifting across the courtyard, the slow flick of a tail against patterned tile, the subtle narrowing of eyes when torchlight brightened at dusk. Visitors to the court would sometimes pause along the colonnades, observing from a respectful distance. The presence of a living lion beneath painted ceilings carried a quiet contrast. Above, pigments depicted allegory and triumph. Below, muscle and fur embodied a different kind of authority. Yet the two did not compete. They coexisted within the same frame, each lending the other a deeper texture. Seasonal change touched even these enclosed spaces. In summer, heat settled heavily upon stone, and the lion stretched long within the narrow bands of shade cast by pillars. In winter, braziers were placed discreetly nearby, their warmth rising in gentle currents. The mane thickened against cooler air. Straw was replenished more frequently. The rhythms of court life adjusted almost imperceptibly around this steady breathing presence. There were moments in early morning, before official duties gathered momentum, when the courtyard felt suspended outside of ceremony. Pale light filtered over the walls, softening the colors of frescoes into muted tones. In that hour, the lion sometimes rose and walked the perimeter of its space. Each step was deliberate, weight pressing evenly through padded paws. The sound was subdued, a low brushing against stone that seemed to anchor the courtyard more firmly to the earth. The animal's diet arrived through familiar corridors, carried in covered baskets. The act of feeding was handled with routine precision. No spectacle surrounded it. The lion ate as any creature does, with focus and without hurry. Afterwards, it often returned to rest, folding its limbs beneath its body, mane settling into a loose halo against the tile. Over time, the presence of the lion became woven into the daily pattern of the court. Letters were drafted within view of its enclosure. Musicians tuned instruments along nearby galleries. Diplomats crossed the courtyard, their cloaks moving softly in the evening air. The lion remained, a constant weight in the periphery of vision. Its image, already familiar in heraldry, gained new subtlety. Artists who had studied the animal at close range began to render it with greater understanding of muscle and posture. Tapestries shifted slightly in detail. Carvings grew more attentive to the curve of shoulder and the lay of fur. The living presence beneath the painted ceiling influenced how the symbolic lion would appear in future generations. Yet within the courtyard itself, the relationship remained uncomplicated. The lion was neither a performance nor a threat. It was a fact. A breathing fact of the palace. The attendants knew its routines. The courtiers knew its resting place. Even the birds that nested among roof tiles adjusted their flight paths accordingly. At dusk, when torches were lit and shadows lengthened across the patterned floor, the lion's mane seemed almost to gather the light. Gold threads woven into banners above echoed the deeper tones of its fur. The air cooled. A faint breeze moved through the arches. Somewhere beyond the walls, the wider city continued its own quiet rhythm. There were occasions when the lion was displayed during formal processions within the palace grounds, not paraded in spectacle, but allowed to be seen by visiting dignitaries from behind carefully maintained boundaries. Its steady gaze and unhurried posture conveyed something more enduring than ornament. It suggested a connection to lands beyond the horizon, to sun-baked plains and distant heat. Yet even within this symbolic weight, the lion remained a creature of habit. It rested where it had rested before. It drank from the same basin. It walked the same perimeter. Its world, though framed by marble and fresco, was defined by repetition and familiarity. As years passed, the knowledge of how to keep such an animal grew quieter and more assured. The courtyard that once seemed altered by its arrival now felt incomplete without it. Stone and fur had settled into an arrangement that no longer required adjustment. And still, in certain evenings when the sky deepened into indigo and torchlight flickered along painted ceilings, the lion's outline against the patterned floor carried a sense of contained vastness. A reminder that the wild, though resting, had not diminished. Beyond these courtyards, in other courts and along distant roads, there were creatures of even greater scale whose arrival unfolded differently. Heavier footsteps would one day cross cobblestones. Larger shadows would fall against palace gates. And the measured stillness of these lion-held spaces would quietly prepare the court for another kind of presence, one that moved not with feline grace, but with a slower, earthbound weight. The deep, measured steps of the elephant approached the palace gates in the pale morning light, each footfall pressing firmly against cobbled stone, yet carrying a weight that seemed more contemplative than imposing. The animals of the court had arrived slowly, one by one, but this new presence moved with a deliberate grace that immediately altered the rhythm of the day. Courtiers, who had grown accustomed to the resting lion beneath frescoed ceilings, paused at a distance, their motions subdued, not from fear but from quiet acknowledgement of the creature's steady passage. The air itself seemed to expand, accommodating the gentle mass as it advanced toward the inner courtyard. Beneath the arches, torches glimmered faintly against the polished stone, their glow soft against the pale skin of the elephant, whose skin was textured and folded, catching light in gentle creases and subtle shadows. The palace walls, painted with intricate scenes of legend and myth, reflected this new presence as though in response. The color softened, not out of submission but in quiet harmony. The animal's tusks, ivory smooth and curving with slow elegance, echoed the carved ornamentation of the gates and balconies. Every step was absorbed into the courtyard's geometry, the procession moving neither hurriedly nor hesitantly, but with measured certainty. Attendants flanked the elephant, carrying water and bundles of fresh vegetation. Their movements were slow and precise, the routine familiar to those who had managed ceremonial arrivals before. The rhythm of preparation was as much a part of the scene as the elephant itself. Gates were opened with deliberate timing, ropes adjusted, small wooden bridges placed over channels of water. Nothing was abrupt, nothing forced. Each action flowed into the next with soft fluidity, maintaining the quiet dignity of the moment. Observers in the nearby gallery windows traced the creature's progress from afar. Light shifted across the courtyard, glancing off the stone floors and pooling beneath the broad, patterned eaves. The elephant's presence seemed to draw attention to the details of the palace itself. The fine carving of balustrades, the subtle colors in painted friezes, the delicate latticework that softened the edges of open walkways. Even the air felt different, carrying faint scents of straw and vegetation along with the warm stone aroma left from hours of sunlight. When the elephant paused to drink, the slow rise and fall of its massive trunk created tiny ripples in a shallow basin, each movement deliberate, considered, and unhurried. The attendants moved with equal care, pouring water gently into waiting vessels, brushing the animal's legs lightly to remove dust or debris. The sound of water spilling into stone basins was quiet and rhythmic, adding to the soft ambient melody of the morning. Birds perched in nearby trees shifted their positions gently, acknowledging the newcomer without alarm. Time within the courtyard extended around the elephant's presence. Shadows stretched from columns and statues across the ground as sunlight angled through archways. Every pattern of light and stone seemed to pause in observance. Courtiers and attendants alike adjusted to a pace that harmonized with the creature, moving slowly and deliberately, their footsteps absorbed by the resonance of stone and tile. The elephant's massive frame cast long, soft shadows, which merged with the carved shapes of mythological figures above, creating a quiet interplay of scale and proportion. Later, the animal was guided toward an enclosure designed for comfort and safety. Its dimensions were generous, allowing movement without urgency. Fountains in small corners maintained a steady flow of water. Shaded areas were formed from woven lattice and pale stone, providing refuge from midday sun. The enclosure, though built for care and practicality, was also meant to honor the ceremonial passage that had brought the elephant into the heart of the palace. Everything was aligned to maintain calm and balance. The creature's path, the attendants' movements, and the quiet observation of those who had paused to witness its arrival. The arrival of the elephant introduced a new kind of rhythm to the court. It was neither chaotic nor dramatic. Rather, it shaped a different cadence, one that encouraged slower steps, longer pauses, and a deeper attention to small details. Leaves swayed in the gentle breeze, fountains trickled steadily, and the echoes of stone floors absorbed the subtle sounds of shifting weight and measured breathing. Even the distant sound of a courtyard gate closing resonated differently in the presence of this large, steady form. In the late afternoon, when light softened against the walls, the elephant moved again, tracing a path along the perimeter of its space. Each step was mirrored in the reflection of water in shallow basins, ripples bending the images of arches and distant statues. A gentle wind stirred the surrounding trees, carrying the scent of stone, vegetation, and quiet ritual. Within the palace walls, the day moved with continuity, uninterrupted yet undeniably altered by this new inhabitant. Over the weeks, the elephant's routine settled into a predictable harmony. Feeding, walking, drinking, and resting became small markers of time within the courtyard. Courtiers came to anticipate these markers, adjusting their own movement to maintain the tranquil atmosphere. The palace itself, shaped by human hands, now embraced the subtle influence of a creature whose size and presence demanded a slower rhythm, a softer awareness of the passage of hours. Evenings brought a serene transition. Torches were lit along the perimeter, casting elongated shadows across carefully laid tiles. The elephant rested within its enclosure, head lowered, trunk coiled gently, breath slow and steady. The muted light danced across textured skin and stone, softening boundaries and blending creature and courtyard into a single tableau. From afar, the scene suggested both stability and quiet elegance, the measured presence of life interacting seamlessly with constructed spaces. And while the elephant had arrived with ceremony and preparation, it soon became a familiar rhythm, much like the fountains or the shifting sunlight through latticework. Its size commanded attention without alarm, and its slow, methodical movements encouraged a different tempo in the palace. It was a companion of space and time, a gentle monument in motion, resting lightly upon centuries of architectural order. Yet beyond this moment, beyond the patterns of stone and slow footsteps, there existed the quiet promise of another form of marvel, taller and more slender, whose arrival in the gardens would trace a different line against the sky. The court, now accustomed to weight and presence, would soon notice new shapes that rose above hedges, marking another chapter in the unfolding collection of the extraordinary. In the early hours of a quiet morning, long shadows stretched across the palace gardens, brushing the neatly trimmed hedges and delicate stone pathways with a soft, muted gold. From the distant gates, shapes emerged, tall and slender, moving with a grace that contrasted gently against the heavy weight of elephants seen just days before. The giraffes entered the gardens slowly, each step measured, their long legs unfolding with careful precision. Their necks rose like living columns, reaching above the lower branches of fruit trees and the sculpted greenery, drawing the eye upward and carrying a calm, unhurried majesty. The courtiers and attendants adjusted immediately to the new rhythm. Those accustomed to the slow weight of the elephants now learned to follow the gentler, swaying motion of the giraffes. Every movement was observed with subtle attention. The bending of a neck to nibble tender leaves, the soft shift of hooves on gravel, the careful placement of each step across stone and soil alike. The animal's height gave the gardens a new perspective, stretching familiar spaces into an elegant verticality, inviting the eye to wander skyward and linger. Fountains and reflecting pools became mirrors for the tall figures, rippling softly with the disturbance of their passage. Water shimmered with reflected sunlight, distorted only slightly by gentle movements of leaf and shadow. Birds, accustomed to quiet mornings, paused on branches or fluttered silently to other perches, observing the giraffes without alarm. The air carried faint scents of earth, dew, and the straw scattered for comfort beneath the animals' feet, blending into a serene atmosphere of routine and care. The palace walls, adorned with frescoes and carvings, seemed to interact subtly with the new arrivals. Painted vines and allegorical figures drew the gaze along the same lines as the animals' long necks, creating an unspoken harmony between art and life. Statues of mythological creatures appeared to lean toward the giraffes, their stone faces caught in a perpetual quiet gaze. The courtyards and colonnades that had framed elephants now accommodated a different elegance, showing again how the architecture could adjust without interruption, simply observing and reflecting the living forms within. Attendants moved with slow, deliberate gestures. Baskets of fresh foliage were placed at convenient heights, allowing the giraffes to reach without strain. Ropes and low barriers guided movement subtly, preserving the animals' freedom while maintaining order in the gardens. No hurried commands were needed. The rhythm of care unfolded as a soft choreography, integrating the giraffes into the daily pattern of palace life with patience and quiet respect. Visitors to the court often paused along elevated galleries or marble terraces, following the gentle sway of the animals with a calm curiosity. The movement of long legs and sinuous necks created a visual flow that carried the eye naturally through the gardens, from sun-dappled tiles to shaded niches beneath pergolas. Even the gentle sound of hooves on stone contributed to a meditative cadence, mingling with distant fountains, the rustle of leaves, and the faint echo of human footsteps along quiet corridors. The giraffes were not constrained by the same measures as smaller animals, yet they remained composed, adapting with ease to the structured environment. Each day followed a slow pattern, morning light illuminating the pale patterns of their skin, midday rest beneath spreading trees, and evening movement tracing familiar paths. The palace itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with their presence, columns and arches providing frames for each delicate shift in posture, each bend of neck or lift of a hoof. Occasionally, one would stop mid-step to observe a fountain or gaze into a reflecting pool, its eyes steady and contemplative. The sunlight caught in the soft patterns of its coat, creating a quiet interplay of golds and browns that echoed the color of trimmed hedges and painted walls. Every small gesture was deliberate and unhurried, a slow acknowledgement of the space it now shared, a reminder of the gentle expansiveness of the world beyond the walls. Throughout the gardens, the giraffe's presence invited small adjustments. Shade was extended with light canopies woven between tree branches. Walkways were cleared of any obstacles that might disturb their careful steps. Courtiers and attendants alike moved in softened patterns, observing the quiet dignity of the animals while maintaining the peaceful order of daily life. No sound disturbed the overall hush of the morning, only the subtle, deliberate rhythm of life continued, measured against the backdrop of stone, water, and foliage. As the sun climbed higher, warmth pooled along the tiled paths and within alcoves shaded by sculpted hedges. The giraffes stretched toward low-hanging leaves, bending and straightening with a serene fluidity that emphasized the vertical harmony of the garden. Their long eyelashes blinked slowly in the gentle light, a rhythmic punctuation to the unfolding scene. Streams of sunlight scattered across the courtyard in irregular patterns, shifting with the animals' movements and lending a quiet dynamism to otherwise still stone and foliage. Throughout the day, shadows lengthened and contracted, following the animals' careful path. The slow arc of their necks drew attention upward, highlighting trellises, archways, and painted ceilings visible even from below. Each movement, though seemingly simple, carried subtle weight, shaping the perception of the space around them. Courtiers noted the elegance and quiet observation, allowing the giraffe's natural grace to guide their steps, their gaze, and even the pace of conversation. Evening approached gradually. Soft light glinted along the edges of stone and water, casting reflections that danced lazily across the gardens. The giraffes paused beneath spreading trees, their long necks swaying gently in the fading warmth. Straw provided comfort beneath their hooves, and attendants moved quietly, performing small tasks with deliberate calm. The courtyard absorbed the day's rhythm, carrying the echo of measured footsteps, the whisper of leaves, and the serene presence of towering forms. Through this continued observation, the palace and its inhabitants came to accommodate the giraffes with minimal disturbance, recognizing their slow, gentle influence on the tempo of daily life. Even in quiet moments, their outlines against the sky and treetops offered a sense of perspective, drawing eyes upward and softening the scale of the world. The gardens became a place where height and elegance coexisted seamlessly with the established routines of stone, water, and human care. And as night began to settle, shadows lengthening across the courtyards and the last sunlight fading behind distant towers, the attention of the court began to shift subtly. Beyond these lofty forms, smaller and more nimble visitors of distant lands would soon make their presence known. Through archways, along garden paths, and atop low walls, creatures both playful and curious would emerge, weaving quietly into the tapestry of the palace's daily life, bringing a different rhythm, lighter and more intricate, to the world beneath the trees. The sun had softened its ascent over the palace courtyards, brushing the tiled walkways with gentle warmth, when the first small forms appeared among the columns and stone balustrades. Monkeys, delicate and alert, made their way along the edges of low walls, tails tracing quiet arcs in the air. They were not hurried, yet their movements carried a lightness, a playful balance that contrasted with the slow, deliberate steps of the giraffes that had passed days before. Observers, careful not to disturb the gentle rhythm of the morning, watched from shaded galleries, the animals' small gestures carrying a quiet, absorbing charm. The courtyards, prepared for larger creatures, now offered shelter and space for these nimble visitors. Branches of clipped orange and citrus trees reached into the open paths, providing perches that allowed the monkeys to navigate without risk. Straw was scattered in gentle patches beneath arches and along mosaic floors, a familiar cushion for landing or resting, while water basins reflected the subtle movement of sun and shadow, offering a soft mirror for their delicate forms. Every detail of the courtyard seemed to accommodate their presence, the architecture responding not with spectacle but with gentle acceptance. Lemurs, with eyes wide and luminous, emerged cautiously from shaded alcoves, their tails waving in soft arcs like flowing ribbons of dusk. They moved with measured curiosity, exploring the corners of marble and stone that offered shade or quiet. The sound of their footsteps was soft, almost imperceptible against the echoing tiles, a hushed counterpoint to the occasional ripple of water or the whisper of leaves stirred by a mild breeze. Each step was careful, deliberate in its attention, yet carried an understated vitality that infused the courtyard with a sense of gentle liveliness. Attendants moved quietly among the animals, adjusting feeding vessels and offering small bundles of fruit and foliage. Their movements were smooth and deliberate, avoiding sudden motions, their hands steady and slow. Monkeys nibbled with calm attentiveness, pausing occasionally to inspect the textures of the stone beneath their feet or the shade that shifted with the rising sun. Lemurs explored vertical spaces, climbing slender columns and wooden trellises, observing the courtyard from elevated vantage points, their gazes attentive but never alarmed. The light shifted as the day matured, falling softly across carved archways, casting subtle shadows that stretched across stone and foliage alike. Sunlight glimmered on the surfaces of small fountains and reflecting pools, creating scattered points of brightness that danced gently on the animal's fur. The monkeys paused to drink from shallow basins, their reflections bending slightly in rippling water, while the lemurs traced gentle curves along trellises, their forms blending with the latticework and patterned shadows. From the galleries, the scene appeared almost as a living tapestry, layers of movement and stillness intertwining. Courtiers, accustomed to the weight and scale of elephants or the elongated elegance of giraffes, now followed the smaller forms with slower, more considered attention. Their eyes traced delicate arcs, following tails and paws with quiet patience, acknowledging the small creature's presence without interfering. In this way the palace adapted again, molding its rhythms to the quiet patterns of its newest inhabitants. Straw and scattered leaves softened the sound of movement across floors, so that each tiny step was muffled into the ambient hum of the courtyard. Branches overhead swayed faintly, offering shade and subtle motion as sunlight filtered through the leaves. Occasionally, a breeze carried faint scents of fruit or warm stone, mingling with the earthy aroma of the animals themselves. Every small gesture, the bend of a paw, the tilt of a head, the cautious sniff of a lemur, added to the overall calm, measured tableau. Throughout the day the animals followed slow routines, tracing familiar pathways beneath arches, along tiled edges and over low walls. They explored, rested, and sometimes paused to observe fountains or shaded corners, their attention shifting gently from one small detail to another. Each gesture was simple, yet purposeful in its quiet rhythm, harmonizing naturally with the courtyard and its inhabitants. The palace itself seemed to breathe with this cadence, absorbing the presence of motion without disruption. In the late afternoon, the light softened into pale gold, stretching along tiles and through latticework. Monkeys climbed higher, tracing the edges of roofs or balancing along trellis beams, while lemurs nestled within shaded niches, their long tails curled delicately around small limbs. The courtyard's stone surfaces reflected their forms faintly, merging them with patterns of light and shadow in a gentle, shifting mosaic. Attendants moved slowly among them, providing fresh foliage or water, always careful to maintain the tranquil rhythm that defined the day. Sounds were minimal: the whisper of wind, the trickle of fountains, the soft shuffle of paws across straw or stone. Even in the quietest moments, the animal's presence lent a subtle vitality to the courtyard, a gentle contrast to the still architecture. Observers found themselves lingering on the simple movements, drawn into the calm attentiveness of tiny heads turning, ears flicking, tails tracing arcs in the air. Each motion seemed both independent and perfectly aligned with the serene order of the palace. As evening approached, shadows deepened slowly along the mosaic tiles, falling into the niches and alcoves where lemurs had settled. Monkeys paused, resting on branches or low walls, tails draped loosely across surfaces, eyes blinking slowly as the courtyard cooled. The delicate rhythms of the day gave way to the softer tempo of twilight. Water in basins reflected fading light, echoing the shapes of small, quiet forms. A calmness settled across stone and foliage, the subtle movement of creatures blending seamlessly with the gentle architecture and muted sky above. Even in this quiet, the presence of the courtyard's smaller residents prepared the stage for creatures of yet another subtle grace, whose colors and plumage would soon catch the eye in softly lit galleries and open walkways. Shadows lengthened, the air grew still, and the court awaited the slow unveiling of feathered visitors, carrying colors and patterns that would complement the calm rhythm already established by monkeys and lemurs among the arches and tiles. The morning light filtered softly through the high, arched windows of the palace galleries, falling upon polished stone floors that gleamed faintly beneath the gentle warmth. Along these walkways, peacocks moved with deliberate care, their long tails trailing in slow, mesmerizing arcs. Each step seemed measured, almost ceremonial, as if the animals were aware of the delicate space they traversed. Light caught upon the iridescent feathers, scattering subtle hints of blue, green, and gold across the walls and arches, a quiet reflection that mingled with the muted shadows of carved pillars and low-hanging tapestries. Observers moving along the corridors noted the soft swish of tail feathers against the stone, the gentle shuffle of claws on polished tile. The birds were calm, deliberate in their navigation, pausing occasionally to lift their heads or adjust a foot, their eyes attentive yet serene. In the stillness, every subtle motion, the flick of a feather, the shift of a wing, became a quiet punctuation, harmonizing with the distant sound of fountains in the courtyards below and the faint murmur of wind through open windows. Among them, smaller feathered guests moved with equal quietude. Finches and doves flitted along the edges of balustrades and across the latticework of upper galleries, their soft calls merging with the faint rustle of tail feathers. These birds were careful in their passage, attentive to the larger presence of the peacocks, yet their movements introduced a delicate rhythm to the spaces, weaving a layer of soft motion that balanced the grandeur of the more imposing birds. Light traced their forms, highlighting subtle patterns in plumage and the gentle arch of wings in repose. Attendants moved among the birds with the same calm deliberation that had accompanied the courtyard's monkeys and lemurs. Feeding bowls were placed along carefully chosen intervals, designed to encourage natural exploration without disturbance. The sounds of soft gravel shifting or water trickling into shallow basins punctuated the silence, yet never intruded, maintaining a gentle, unbroken cadence. Every motion was orchestrated with patience, creating a seamless interaction between caretaker and creature, human and feathered life alike. Through the galleries, sunlight shifted as the day progressed, painting walls and floors with the slow progression of shadow. Peacocks paused beneath window arches, their long tails draped elegantly across stone, catching scattered light and glimmering softly. Smaller birds moved beneath and around them, creating a layered tableau of motion and stillness. Each observer, human or otherwise, seemed caught in the quiet spell, attentive yet unhurried, absorbing the subtle interplay of color, light, and gentle movement. The architecture of the galleries, with its high ceilings, carved cornices, and open arcades, provided both frame and stage for the feathered guests. Light filtered through lattices and open windows, forming shifting patterns on walls and floors. Each movement of a bird shifted the reflections and shadows slightly, creating a continuous, fluid interaction between living form and constructed space. Even the courtyards glimpsed through archways seemed quieter in comparison, as though the focus on feather and fin had altered the perception of time itself. Occasionally, a peacock would lift its tail slowly, adjusting the spread in a deliberate, languid manner. The shimmer of colors shifted with the motion, reflecting softly across columns and onto the cool stone beneath. Finches or doves nearby paused in observation, their tiny forms momentarily still, watching the gentle display. The interplay was harmonious, neither rushed nor startling, a slow choreography that seemed to extend naturally from the calm routines of the palace's daily life. Throughout the morning, the birds followed gentle rhythms, wandering through sunlit passages, pausing in shaded niches, and occasionally dipping toward water or scattered seed. Their movements created subtle lines of observation, drawing the eye along corridors, across courtyards glimpsed below, and up into galleries where sculptures and frescoes reflected the muted brilliance of feathered color. Light and shadow, stone and plumage, formed a continuous interplay of textures, each element observed without haste. Evening approached gradually, and the galleries softened into muted tones as sunlight faded. Peacocks rested, tails trailing softly behind them, while finches and doves found quiet nooks and corners or atop lattice edges. The corridors, once paths of gentle exploration, now became spaces of repose, shadows stretching slowly along polished floors. Water basins reflected the fading light, shimmering faintly as the creatures settled into a slower tempo. The air carried a delicate scent of feathers, straw, and stone warmed by daylight, a calm presence that seemed to settle over the palace in quiet rhythm. The movements of feathered guests, both large and small, left a lingering effect upon the court. Every corridor, every gallery, Every balcony seemed imbued with subtle attention, guiding visitors to move with softer steps, to pause, to breathe. In this environment, even small gestures became significant. A tilt of the head, the gentle flick of a wing, a slow adjustment of tail feathers. The court's inhabitants observed, moved gently, and absorbed the soft cadences of life unfolding around them. As night fell, long shadows mingled with the last fragments of light filtering through the arches. The feathered guests paused in corners on latticework or along ledges, settling with calm poise. The courtyard beyond waited quietly, poised for the next chapter of inhabitants to appear. Here, among the galleries, the soft pulse of life continued, carrying forward the delicate rhythms established by monkeys, lemurs, and the graceful parade of peacocks. The stage was set for creatures of a different character to enter, introducing new textures of movement and presence, still within the gentle, unhurried world of the palace. As the day stretched toward its quiet peak, the palace courtyards found themselves shaded by long, drifting shadows, the soft illumination of late afternoon casting gentle patterns upon stone and tile. Above these spaces, hawks began to glide with a deliberate ease, wings extended wide in silent arcs that traced invisible paths across the sky. Their flight was measured and calm, each motion blending seamlessly into the stillness of the air, as though the world itself had slowed to accommodate their presence. From high vantage points atop towers and colonnades, the birds surveyed the courtyards, their eyes attentive yet serene, scanning the palace grounds with a patient grace that required no urgency. Beneath them, the courtyards remained quiet. Stone fountains murmured softly, water reflecting flecks of sunlight that shifted with the slow rotation of the day. The shadow of each hawk moved across tiles and garden beds in a continuous, fluid motion, creating subtle dances of darkness and light. Trees swayed gently with a faint breeze, their leaves whispering a slow accompaniment to the winged figures above. Courtiers and attendants, accustomed to the more intimate movements of peacocks and lemurs, now lifted their gazes skyward, following the smooth arcs of the hawks without sound or haste. Occasionally, a hawk would circle higher, wings tracing an elongated ellipse in the warm sky, before descending in a careful glide toward a branch or terrace ledge. The descent was slow, precise, almost ceremonious, drawing the eye along a continuous line from cloud-spotted sky to sunlit stone below. Their presence added a quiet verticality to the palace grounds, a gentle reminder of the open air that extended beyond the carefully arranged gardens, and yet, despite their height and freedom, they moved in measured synchrony with the rhythm already established by the birds and small mammals inhabiting the lower spaces. Among the hawks, smaller birds of prey and songbirds navigated the upper reaches of the courtyards and galleries, tracing arcs and swoops in quiet harmony. They paused atop ledges and lattice edges, occasionally tilting heads to observe movement below. Their feathers shimmered in soft sunlight, casting diffused colors across stone and foliage, delicate notes of color that contrasted with the more muted shades of wall and column. Each motion was gentle, precise, a subtle addition to the ongoing tableau of quiet observation, their wings catching the light and creating moving reflections that danced across fountains, tiles, and the smooth surfaces of sculptures. Attendants stationed along balconies and galleries moved with measured care, ensuring that food for smaller birds and prey was placed without disturbing the calm rhythm of the court. Even their steps were softened, their motions synchronized with the hovering glide of winged guests. Every gesture, every careful placement of a perch or feeding dish, blended into the gentle choreography of flight above, stone below, and light in between, creating a continuous sense of slow, absorbing observation that defined the palace at this hour. The sunlight began to warm the upper surfaces of arches and columns, casting the hawks' shadows across courtyards where lemurs had once explored and peacocks had paused. Stone and tile became a quiet canvas for these silhouettes, stretching and shifting with the subtle arcs of the birds' wings. Observers moved beneath, adjusting positions to follow the motion, pausing as shadows elongated or contracted across garden beds and mosaic patterns. The attention given to these silent wings was soft and deliberate, a slow meditation of observation rather than curiosity or excitement. Through the afternoon, the hawks traced gentle loops above fountains, staircases, and open terraces. Each motion was a study in grace, slow beats of wings, slight adjustments in posture, the controlled tilt of heads scanning the world below. The breeze carried the faint scent of warm stone, straw, and the subtle musk of distant gardens, blending into a quiet atmosphere that seemed to slow the passage of time. Courtyards and galleries alike responded to the rhythm of the skybound guests, the stone echoing nothing but the soft murmur of water and the whisper of leaves overhead. As the day waned, the shadows lengthened further across the courtyards, the sunlight softening to muted gold and amber. Hawks settled on elevated ledges and balustrades, wings folding neatly, talons resting lightly upon stone surfaces. Smaller birds of the air gathered nearby, their movements subdued, their feathers reflecting the last gleams of light. The palace adapted once more to the presence of its temporary residents, the delicate balance of air and stone, shadow and motion, maintaining a tranquil harmony without interference or disruption. From these heights, the bird's presence brought a quiet observation to every corner of the palace below. Courtiers and attendants alike adjusted steps and gazes, allowing the space above to remain uninterrupted, attentive without intrusion. The gentle descent of evening light created a tapestry of soft shadows, delicate reflections and subtle color, uniting winged movement with the textured architecture of columns, arches and tiled floors. As twilight deepened, the hawks rested quietly on high perches, wings folded in repose. Shadows stretched long across the courtyard, reaching beneath arches and along the borders of flowerbeds and mosaic paths. The gentle rhythms established by earlier arrivals, monkeys, lemurs, peacocks, continued below, interwoven with the stillness above. The stage was now prepared for more intimate guests, creatures smaller and subtler, whose quiet movements would explore the spaces beneath hedges, steps, and shaded corners. Their presence promised a different pace, closer to the earth, delicate and attentive, yet perfectly aligned with the unhurried tempo of the palace's life. As the soft amber of evening deepened across the courtyards, shadows lengthened and stretched over stone steps, flowerbeds, and low walls, offering quiet refuge to the smaller and more discreet inhabitants of the palace grounds. Tiny paws brushed against the cool mosaic tiles, moving with careful attention, the faintest stir of fur and whiskers audible only to those who paused and listened. In corners shadowed beneath arches, small nocturnal creatures emerged with deliberate calm, testing the open spaces with cautious curiosity, exploring the edges of fountains, garden paths, and the subtle curves of carefully sculpted hedges. Among them were rodents and small mammals, their coats blending with the muted colors of stone and straw. Each movement was measured, a gentle exploration of textures beneath tiny feet. Their noses twitched softly as they followed faint scents left behind by leaves or the remnants of earlier meals, pausing occasionally to listen to the distant murmur of water or the rustle of leaves overhead. The courtyard, bathed in the waning light, became a mosaic of delicate motion and shadow, each creature contributing to the quiet rhythm of the evening without disrupting the stillness. Shaded alcoves and low wooden trellises provided subtle vantage points. Small creatures moved among them with practiced ease, slipping silently between shadow and light. The sound of delicate claws against stone or wood was almost imperceptible, blending with the whisper of evening wind that drifted through the courtyards. Here, even the simplest gestures, the lift of a head, a pause to inspect a droplet of water, a gentle sniff, seemed to hold a deliberate elegance, as though the animals were fully attuned to the pace and quiet of their surroundings. The attendants had prepared the grounds with the same care and attention that had been given to larger, more visible creatures earlier in the day. Small feeding stations were tucked beneath arches or beside hedges, offering morsels that encouraged calm exploration. Every placement was thoughtful, ensuring that the creatures could move naturally, their subtle habits preserved and respected. Observers found themselves slowing their own movements in response, drawn into a quiet, patient rhythm that mirrored the gentle activity of these hidden residents. Twilight brought a soft coolness to the air, and shadows deepened further under the eaves of galleries and along the bases of stone columns. The faint glimmer of moonlight reflected off polished tiles and water surfaces, highlighting the delicate contours of fur and the subtle twitch of tails. Small creatures moved in gentle arcs, pausing to observe the reflections of light or to sense the quiet rustle of leaves. Even the smallest motion created ripples of awareness across the courtyard, a soft interplay of life and environment that required no intervention, no attention beyond calm observation. From the edges of the gardens, mice traced narrow paths between flower beds, their movements careful yet fluid, exploring the spaces beneath benches and low walls. Hedgehogs padded softly across stone surfaces, pausing beneath the shelter of shrubs to drink from shallow basins, their presence lending a quiet, almost meditative quality to the evening. Occasionally, small birds of night fluttered along walls or branches, their muted calls blending seamlessly with the faint whisper of air through the palace gardens. Every detail of this quiet exploration, the slight rustle of leaves, the slow adjustment of a paw, the careful tilt of an attentive head, was amplified by the hushed atmosphere. Courtyards that had earlier seen the proud sweep of peacocks and the silent glide of hawks now resonated with intimacy and subtlety. The shift from grand display to gentle observation was natural, an easing of pace that invited stillness and reflection upon the smaller movements that often went unnoticed. As the evening deepened, the last remnants of sunlight waned into a muted glow, filtered through latticework and arches. Tiny creatures found preferred resting spots, beneath flower pots, along sheltered steps, or tucked quietly under low hedges. Each settled with a soft grace, their movements blending seamlessly with the architecture and garden layout. The rhythm of life here was soft and consistent, a continuous loop of exploration, pause, and rest, as the courtyard itself seemed to sigh into the calm of approaching night. The presence of these subtle residents created an unspoken balance across the palace grounds. While the more visible inhabitants of the day had traced grand and deliberate patterns, the nocturnal and hidden creatures filled in the quiet gaps, their motions threading the courtyards with a delicate, understated energy. Every shadow and beam of moonlight became a part of the unfolding tableau, accentuating small gestures and gentle curves of movement that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. Observers, human and animal alike, moved with care, their steps and breaths soft, their attention absorbed in the delicate interplay between creature and stone, fur and shadow, movement and stillness. Softly, the night deepened, and the small residents nestled into their chosen resting spots, blending with shadows and muted tones of the palace grounds. Straw, moss, and the cool stone offered comfort, while the faint scent of evening air mingled with the residual warmth of sun-soaked tiles. The courtyard now hummed with the quiet presence of creatures who moved slowly, observed carefully, and rested peacefully, completing a cycle of gentle motion that had unfolded throughout the day. Each tiny creature, from rodent to hedgehog, contributed to a living pattern of calm, rhythm, and subtle observation, guiding the courtyard toward the tranquil night that awaited its final, rarer guests. As twilight deepened into the soft, lingering hues of early night, the gardens of the palace welcomed a different kind of presence. From the quiet corners and shadowed paths, rare and curious visitors began to emerge, their forms and movements subtly distinct from the common denizens that had occupied the courtyards earlier. Exotic birds with muted feathers traced the edges of fountains, their wings brushing gently against the warm evening air, casting fleeting, delicate shadows over stone and water. Lemurs, rare even among the palace's more familiar residents, explored trellises and latticework, their tails curling and uncurling as they navigated the elevated pathways with a calm, deliberate grace. The gardens themselves seemed to respond to these unusual guests. Flower beds shifted softly under a gentle breeze, petals quivering as if in acknowledgement, while the fragrance of blossoms carried faintly across the courtyards, mingling with the cooler scent of evening stone. Each exotic creature moved with attentive precision, aware of the presence of others but entirely focused on its own quiet exploration. Wings beat with measured rhythm, paws touched stone with light confidence, and eyes observed every shadow and glimmer of light with a patience born of instinct. Nothing rushed, nothing demanded attention. The evening continued in an unbroken, serene cadence. Some of these visitors paused near water basins, their reflections merging with the flickering light that danced upon the surface. Tiny ripples expanded slowly, distorting the mirrored shapes of arches and columns, until the creatures adjusted with soft gestures, noses or claws touching the water in gentle curiosity. The subtle sounds, the quiet plop of a droplet, the faint shuffle of a foot against smooth stone, the soft rustle of feathers, wove into the ambient hum of the palace at rest. Attendants moving quietly along shadowed paths ensured that nothing was disturbed, their soft footsteps merging into the background as seamlessly as the creatures themselves. Among the more unusual arrivals were a few birds native to distant lands, brought long ago as curiosities for the palace's collection. Their feathers carried the muted glow of the last evening light, blending pale golds, soft browns, and gentle blues in a harmony that matched the subdued colors of the gardens. They hopped along terraces with careful precision, their claws whispering against stone as they paused to observe the smaller inhabitants who had preceded them. Lemurs and exotic rodents watched from branches and shaded alcoves, tilting heads in quiet attention to these new patterns of movement, the courtyard alive with layered rhythms of gentle activity. The presence of these visitors did not dominate, rather, it added texture and depth to the evening's slow progression. Shadows stretched longer across the tiles, highlighting each curve of wing or arching tail. Moonlight filtering through latticework accentuated subtle motions. The slight flick of a wing, the careful adjustment of a paw, the measured pause of a creature gazing at its reflection. The gardens themselves seemed aware of these delicate interactions, the soft scent of flowering plants mingling with the earthy tones of hedges, and the cool stone warmed slightly by the fading sun. Every movement, every quiet gesture, was integrated into the evolving rhythm of the courtyard, a slow and deliberate interweaving of life and space. Attendants had long prepared for these rare arrivals, placing shallow water basins and carefully scattered food that encouraged calm, natural behavior. The creatures approached with soft steps, cautious yet unhurried, moving with an awareness of both their environment and the gentle expectations of the space. Nothing startled, nothing intruded. Each motion, from the sweep of a wing to the tiptoe of a small paw, contributed to an ongoing visual symphony of calm and subtle exploration. The gardens, once bustling with more familiar activity, now resonated with the quiet curiosity of these unusual guests, a reminder that even the rare and uncommon could become part of the slow, measured rhythm of palace life. As night deepened, the exotic birds settled upon high branches and ledges, their wings folding neatly, eyes closing with gentle patience. Lemurs retreated into shadowed trellises, tails curling as they found favored perches, blending seamlessly into the subdued patterns of the garden. Smaller, previously hidden creatures remained in corners, their quiet presence providing a soft counterpoint to the exotic arrivals. The entire courtyard became a tapestry of layered stillness, where movement and repose existed simultaneously, each element respectful of the other, each contributing to the soft cadence of evening that had unfolded since the arrival of the hawks above and the nocturnal residents below. Subtle patterns of light, shadow, and reflection highlighted the gentle movements of each creature. Moonlight, softened by the evening air, painted the surfaces of stone, water, and foliage with muted color, revealing textures only to the patient observer. The quiet rustle of feathers, the faint scraping of claws, the gentle tilt of heads, all these details formed a continuous, unhurried narrative of presence and observation. Even the occasional stir of a tail or wing was absorbed seamlessly into the broader rhythm of the garden, each gesture a quiet punctuation in the slow unfolding of night. In these moments, the palace courtyards and gardens were entirely alive, yet entirely calm. The rare and curious visitors did not disrupt but enhanced the delicate balance of motion, shadow, and stillness that had been cultivated over the course of the day. Observers, human and animal alike, adjusted their attention, their movements slowed to match the measured tempo set by these gentle arrivals. Each step, each breath, each faint sound contributed to a pervasive sense of calm, an awareness that the night itself was embracing the gardens, encouraging every creature to move slowly, observe patiently, and eventually rest without urgency. The air cooled subtly as the night matured, carrying the soft scent of flowers, earth, and distant water. The rare creatures, now settled in their chosen perches and resting places, became part of the broader rhythm that had defined the palace's evening, a mosaic of gentle movements, soft sounds, and lingering light fading toward shadow. The courtyard, the trellises, the hedges, and the tiled paths all harmonized into a serene whole, the exotic and unusual blending with the familiar and hidden, establishing a quiet, almost meditative order. The stage was thus set for the final phase of the evening. With the rare and curious creatures now at rest and shadows deepening across every surface, the palace courtyards and gardens began their gradual, gentle slide into stillness. The soft patterns of wing and paw, of light and shadow, would continue to settle, preparing the grounds for the last hushed moments of night. The delicate rhythm established across hours of careful observation and presence was now ready to transition into the final calm, a slow fade toward the quiet closure of the nocturnal cycle. Night had fully settled over the palace, and the gardens, courtyards, and hidden corners had assumed a gentle, unhurried stillness. Shadows now stretched in elongated waves across stone pathways, curling around flower beds and low hedges, blending into the muted tones of moonlight. Every surface that had felt the delicate steps of nocturnal creatures earlier in the evening now bore the subtle imprint of their passage, a quiet testament to the rhythm of life that had unfolded without hurry. The fountains, once rippling from paws and wings, now mirrored only the faint shimmer of moonlight, their soft murmurs echoing quietly across the tiles. The rare and exotic visitors, those curious birds and lemurs that had explored the trellises and alcoves, had nestled into their chosen perches. Wings were folded neatly against soft feathers, tails coiled gently, and eyes slowly closed as breathing deepened into the evening's gentle cadence. Their presence, though subdued, lingered in the subtle vibrations of the courtyard. The faint rustle of leaves, the delicate patter of tiny claws against stone, the distant murmur of water over carved basins. Each element of the garden, from the tallest arching branches to the lowest clusters of moss, seemed to exhale quietly, participating in the pervasive calm. The small nocturnal residents, those creatures that had scuttled and padded through shadowed corners, now rested beneath the shelter of hedges or in the hidden alcoves of archways. Their breathing, slow and steady, merged with the faint whisper of evening wind, carrying with it the subtle fragrances of flowers and stone warmed by the day's sun. Even the minutest of movements, the twitch of a whisker, the soft shift of a paw, was absorbed into the quiet rhythm of the night, indistinguishable from the faint, sighing stir of leaves or the soft flow of water. Across the courtyards, moonlight traced gentle patterns over carefully laid tiles and carved stone, illuminating the textures of the gardens without harshness or contrast. Every petal, leaf, and stone became a part of a serene tableau, each reflecting the slow, deliberate passage of time. The interplay of light and shadow drew attention to the stillness, inviting the observer to linger, to breathe in harmony with the sleeping creatures, and to become aware of the subtle continuity that bound the palace grounds into a single, cohesive whole. The attendants, who had tended to the needs of the inhabitants with quiet care throughout the day and evening, now moved even more softly, their steps blending seamlessly into the ambient hush. They checked the resting places, adjusted a basin here, swept a path there, always mindful not to disturb the delicate balance that had been cultivated. Their presence was a gentle continuation of the slow rhythm, a reminder that care and attention could coexist with complete stillness, that the human touch could be unobtrusive, respectful, and almost imperceptible in its effect. In this tranquil environment, the palace itself seemed to breathe. Stone walls, latticework, and garden paths absorbed the cooling night air, expanding and contracting subtly with the rhythm of wind and moonlight. Shadows lengthened and shifted imperceptibly as the night progressed, tracing new patterns that only the most patient observer might notice. Every movement, whether from a leaf, a small creature, or the distant flight of a night bird returning to its perch, contributed to an encompassing sense of calm, a gentle orchestration of sound, light, and motion that required nothing from anyone but quiet attention and stillness. The interplay of flora and fauna continued to shape the atmosphere. Fragrant flowers, long settled into the cooler air, released faint aromas that mixed with the subtle earthy scent of soil and moss. Birds, now resting high in the branches, occasionally adjusted their feathers with a soft rustle, a reminder of life that remained active yet serene. Even the distant hum of water from the fountains and small basins became rhythmic, part of the meditative environment, guiding the senses toward relaxation and contemplation. Nothing intruded, nothing demanded, and everything merged into a seamless nightscape of gentle presence. From the elevated trellises to the shadowed alcoves below, every corner of the palace grounds now carried a softened energy. The once bustling courtyards, where peacocks had spread their tails and small mammals had darted among tiles, had transformed into spaces of quiet reflection. Moonlight caressed the edges of stone and foliage, highlighting textures in subdued silver and gray, revealing depth without creating contrast, shaping a world where observation could be slow, deliberate, and soothing. Each element, from the faintly stirring air to the gentle settling of creatures, contributed to a pervasive sense of repose. The final moments of night approached with deliberate subtlety. Creatures that had explored, wandered, and observed now fully embraced rest, settling into their chosen locations with small, careful gestures. Leaves, disturbed by tiny paws or wings earlier, had returned to stillness, and water surfaces reflected only the faint glimmer of moonlight. Shadows merged into a continuous tapestry of muted tones, and the palace grounds seemed to pause entirely, holding the memory of the evening's gentle movement within the quiet of stone, foliage, and sky. The garden paths, courtyards, and alcoves now existed in a unified calm. The faint traces of activity, subtle movements, and delicate interactions had woven together a narrative that needed no voice, no urgency, no attention beyond that of soft, relaxed observation. The night, in its slow unfolding, had completed a cycle, from the quiet rustle of small nocturnal creatures to the subtle exploration of exotic visitors, and now into an encompassing stillness that allowed every element to settle in harmony. The palace itself seemed to exhale, the gardens and courtyards becoming a single, serene entity in the soft embrace of darkness and moonlight. As the hours deepened, the final breaths of the night whispered across the stone and foliage. Each resting creature, each settled shadow, each gently rippling pool of water carried with it the lingering presence of the evening's quiet life. Movement had softened into rest, sound into gentle hum, and light into muted silver, leaving the palace grounds in a state of complete serenity. Every corner, every alcove, every trellis had found its quiet equilibrium, and the courtyard as a whole seemed to fold itself into the calm, carrying the observer gently toward the stillness that awaited beyond the garden gates. The night held on, vast and gentle, and the palace and gardens rested within it, a world carefully balanced between the memory of motion and the perfection of stillness. Here, the story of the courtyard, its hidden inhabitants, its rare and curious guests, and the subtle dance of light and shadow, could finally fade into the last gentle breaths of night, preparing the way for the slow return of day, and the continuity of life that would unfold once more. You don't need to keep listening anymore. The story can fade into the background now, becoming softer with every moment. If you're still awake, that's perfectly fine. There's no rush and nothing you need to remember. Just let your breathing slow down. Let your thoughts drift where they want to go. And allow the quiet of this night to settle around you. This story will remain here, gently playing while you rest. Tomorrow night, a new night will be waiting for you, and it's one you won't want to miss. And if sleep hasn't arrived just yet, you can quietly return to one of the previous nights, and let those stories guide you instead. For now, sleep well.